This is a scenario, my friend. This is a scenario right here. You did it 2 years ago. It's a scenario right here, right now. You have the chance to reject the truth. UPB is wrong, and it will permanently enhance the well-being of people. But you didn't take that, did you? So even by your own argument, you're not only wrong, you're immoral.
A few weeks ago, Stefan Molyneux published a response to my video titled Universally Preferable Behaviour, Debunked.
This is universally preferable behavior debunked.
Within it, he, according to him, rebutted my criticisms, and this is my rebuttal of his rebuttal. But first, please forgive this terse promotion of my Kickstarter project, Debunked. Debunked is a highly strategic card game in which players debunk arguments while preventing their opponents from doing the same. It's got 28 days left to go, and it's already 300% backed. Thank you very, very much, by the way. And so if you want to get your hands on this awesome game, please be sure to visit the Kickstarter. Anyhow, this is Stefan Molyneux's rebuttal, Debunked. It's been 3 years since I created my original video, and it shows. At the time my equipment was poor and my time was scarce, and consequently I had to yell at the microphone in order for it to pick up my voice. Sorry about that, and I was not able to be as articulate and precise as I otherwise could have been. Given this, I think a few of Stefan's comments are valid. My choice of language wasn't perfect.
Or disastrously flawed. Not just flawed, not just wrong, but disastrously flawed.
And I should have bolstered and caveated a few of my statements.
If there was a scenario in which I had to choose between knowing the truth but permanently diminishing the well-being of organisms, or not knowing the truth but permanently improving the well-being of organisms, I would choose the latter every time.
And so for this, I take responsibility and will do my best to rectify these mistakes within this video. But as for Stefan's actual rebuttals, I find them either poor or literally non-existent. I'll explain why shortly, of course, but first, I want to show you a much clearer way of exposing the fallacious nature of UPB. You see, I took Stefan's advice.
God, read that book again, dude. You really need to.
And while doing so, I realised something that I had completely missed the first time round. He equivocates several different definitions of universally preferable behaviour. On page 30, he writes,
"When I speak of a universal preference, I am really defining what is objectively required, or necessary, assuming a particular goal. If I want to live, I do not have to like jazz, but I must eat. Eating remains a preference. I do not have to eat in the same way that I have to obey gravity, but eating is a universal, objective, and binding requirement for staying alive, since it relies on biological facts that cannot be wished away."
So according to this definition, it's not enough to simply say it's universally preferable to eat, as such a statement is not contingent upon a particular goal. We must say it's universally preferable to eat if we want to live.
Preferential behavior can only be binding if the goal is desired.
Now this is a very clear philosophical definition, albeit linguistically confusing, as labelling something that's required universally preferable implies that all entities universally share the same preference, and of course they don't, as Stefan acknowledges. However, it needs to be made very clear that this is simply Immanuel Kant's hypothetical imperative. It's an if-then statement. If you want to live, then you must acquire calories.
If I say that it is preferable for human beings to exercise and eat well, what I am saying is that if you want to be healthy, you should exercise and eat well.
But despite Stefan stealing Kant's work and labelling it UPB, this is nonetheless a crystal clear definition. However, on page 33, he writes,
"Thus, when I talk about universal preferences, I am talking about what people should prefer, not what they always do prefer."
It's subtle, I must admit, but did you catch the crucial difference with this definition? I'll play it again.
"Thus, when I talk about universal preferences, I am talking about what people should prefer, not what they always do prefer."
While the first definition makes no assertion about what we should or ought to prefer,
I am really defining what is objectively required, or necessary, assuming a particular goal.
the second definition does make such an assertion.
I am talking about what people should prefer, not what they always do prefer.
While the first definition is strictly in the realm of facts,
What is objectively required,
the second is strictly in the realm of values.
what people should prefer.
The former is descriptive and the latter is prescriptive. Thus, Stefan employs at least two different definitions of UPB, and he switches between them according to what or who he's confronting. I'll provide an example of this later, but first I want to emphasise that there's nothing really wrong with Stefan's first definition, other than the fact that it doesn't deliver what he promised.
Oh, it is the holy grail of philosophy. It has been sought since the time of Socrates. I believe I have done it.
Universally preferable behavior proves that rape, theft, assault and murder are immoral.
And, of course, that he's simply stolen Kant's hypothetical imperative and sold it as if it's his own. Which, by the way, according to his own moral framework, is immoral.
Theft are immoral.
But as for his second definition, which, if true, would deliver what he promised, it fails because it violates David Hume's is-ought distinction, otherwise known as Hume's law and Hume's guillotine, which states that we can't derive what ought to be based upon exclusively what is, or that we can't get a prescription from a description. Now, on page 9, Stefan states that he fully accepts Hume's guillotine.
I fully accept the Humean distinction between is and ought. Valid moral rules cannot be directly derived from the existence of anything in reality. The fact that human beings in general prefer to live and must successfully interact with reality in order to do so cannot be the basis for any valid theory of ethics.
But in his response to me, he implies that he rejects Hume's guillotine.
If you can't get an ought from an is, you are getting an ought from an is, which is you ought not talk about getting an ought from an is, like you have already created one.
Now, Stefan's assertion here not only represents why he doesn't understand Hume's law, but also why he doesn't understand many of the criticisms of UPB. Saying that you can't get an ought from an is an is statement, not an ought statement. Hume didn't imply that you ought not get an ought from an is, he implied that it is the case that you can't get an ought from an is. But how exactly does this shine light on UPB, you might be wondering? Well, in reply to me explaining that even if all people believed that the moon was made of cheese, this wouldn't make it so, Stefan said the following.
Okay, so, fantastic. So if people believe that the moon is made of cheese, they're objectively wrong and they should correct their beliefs according to the reality that the moon is not made of cheese. UPB, right there, preference for truth, preference for objectivity, preference for the concepts in the mind matching what actually goes on in reality. Come on, dude.
Now, did you catch Stefan's violation of Hume's law? If there's anything I want you to take away from this video, it's this. He began by making an is or factual or descriptive statement.
So if people believe that the moon is made of cheese, they're objectively wrong.
But he concluded by making an ought or should or prescriptive statement.
And they should correct their beliefs according to the reality.
He said it is the case that they're wrong.
They're objectively wrong.
And so therefore they ought to correct their beliefs.
And they should correct their beliefs.
But as any undergraduate philosophy student will tell you, this simply doesn't follow.
Dude.
Stefan is equivocating truth with good. But just because something is true, that doesn't make it good. Truth is about what is, and good is about what ought to be. That, in a nutshell, is what's wrong with UPB. Stefan is either executed via Hume's guillotine, and hence has failed to deliver what he promised.
I fully accept the Humean distinction between is and ought.
They're objectively wrong, and they should correct their beliefs according to the reality.
Or he's initiated force by stealing Kant's hypothetical imperative and selling it as if it's his own. Okay, with this made clear, I'm now going to respond to some of Molyneux's comments, starting with his first and primary argument.
Arguing against the validity of universally preferable behaviour demonstrates universally preferable behaviour.
In reply to my saying that
Premise 2 is simply incorrect. It's a false premise. If I state a preference for truth over falsehood when debating UPB, this does not mean that I have a preference for truth over falsehood in all things.
Stefan responded by saying,
Whoa. Okay, I'm trying to follow this, perhaps because he's a stone genius. But let's see here. So I say, arguing against the validity of universally preferable behavior demonstrates universally preferable behavior. Yeah, so this is true, this is valid, this is correct. Which is, if you say, well, there's no such thing as universally preferable behavior, Steph, so you should stop arguing for universally preferable behavior and you should accept that it's invalid, you are accepting universally preferable behavior, obviously, right? Because you are saying that truth is preferable to falsehood, accuracy is preferable to error, we should change our minds to conform with the truth. And so you're talking about objective values, universal truths, and saying that other people, if they wish to say things that are true, must conform to universal standards of truth. So you can't argue against UPB.
Now, before I respond, here's how he more carefully puts it within his book. Please forgive my interjecting, but I believe that doing so is the best way to expose where he's going wrong.
If you correct me on an error that I have made, you are implicitly accepting the fact that it would be better for me to correct my error.
No, I'm not implicitly accepting the fact that it would be better for you to correct your error, because it is not a fact that it would be better or that you ought to correct your error. What I'm implicitly assuming is simply that you have a preference for truth over falsehood.
Your preference for me to correct my error is not subjective, but objective and universal. You don't say to me, you should change your opinion to mine because I would prefer it, but rather, you should correct your opinion because it is objectively incorrect.
Again, no, I don't say that you should correct your opinion because it is objectively incorrect. I say the hypothetical imperative that if you're seeking the truth, you ought to correct your opinion according to the facts. If I did say you should or ought to correct your opinion because it is objectively incorrect, then I'd find myself swiftly executed by Hume's guillotine. As if we put this into Humean language, it would go as follows. It is the case that you're objectively incorrect, and so you ought to correct your opinion. And this, for reasons previously mentioned, doesn't follow. It's a non sequitur. So, to repeat this specifically in reference to Stefan's reply to me.
If you say, well, there's no such thing as universally preferable behavior, Steph, so you should stop arguing for universally preferable behavior and you should accept that it's invalid, you are accepting universally preferable behavior.
Indeed, if I spoke such words, I would be accepting UPB and violating Hume's law, but I don't speak such words because I don't think they're accurate.
You are saying that truth is preferable to falsehood, accuracy is preferable to error, we should change our minds to conform with the truth.
Again, no, I'm not. I don't say that because I don't think that's accurate.
Universal truths, and saying that other people, if they wish to say things that are true, must conform to universal standards of truth. So you can't argue against UPB.
Yes, I am talking about universal truth, and all I am saying is that
if they wish to say things that are true, must conform to universal standards of truth.
All I'm stating is a hypothetical imperative, and I'm implicitly assuming that your telos, or goal, is truth. Moving on, after explaining why premise 2 is a false premise, I went on to state that
What is for sure is that what we value personally is not universal.
And here's how Stefan responded.
Dude, do you even listen to
That
yourself?
what we value personally is not universal.
What we value personally. I'm sorry, I can't see all that. What we value personally is not universal. Look! There's a universal statement of values right there on the screen. Can you read your young eyes? Can you read the text that's right in front of you? What we value personally is not universal. Is that a universal statement? No. Okay, then you have to qualify it and say, I like the idea that what people value personally is not universal, although I reject the very idea of universality. But that's a lot. What we value personally is not universal. Right there. Universal statement. God, read that book again, dude. You really need to.
For the purpose of clarity, I'm going to respond to this one sentence at a time, starting with,
Look! There's a universal statement of values right there on the screen. Can you read your young eyes?
Yes, Stefan, it's a universal statement about what is, not what ought to be. It's a description, not a prescription. It's a universal fact about values, not a universal value itself.
What we value personally is not universal. Is that a universal statement? No. Okay, then you have to
Again, it is a universal statement. It's just not a universal value or preference or moral. It's a statement about what is the case, not what ought to be the case.
Then you have to qualify it and say, I like the idea that what people value personally is not universal, although I reject the very idea of universality.
Again, I don't reject the idea of universality. Objective facts exist, so far as I'm convinced, but that doesn't mean that objective values exist. Of course, there are right and wrong ways to achieve our goals, but that doesn't mean that our goals are good or moral or universally preferable. Unless, of course, you're using exclusively your first definition of UPB.
What is objectively required.
But in which case, all you've got is your stolen loot from Kant and not what you promised.
What people should prefer.
So let's move on to Stefan's second proof, which goes as follows.
All organisms require universally preferred behavior to live. 2. Man is a living organism. 3. Therefore, all living men are alive due to the practice of universally preferred behavior. 4. Therefore, any argument against universally preferable behavior requires an acceptance and practice of universally preferred behavior. 5. Therefore, no argument against the existence of universally preferable behavior can be valid.
Now here's the primary criticism that I gave.
Premise 1 is begging the question, because the conclusion of the argument is implicitly included within the premise, making the entire argument circular.
And here's how Stefan responded.
No, that's not true. No, see, it is saying that in order to make an argument, you have to have pursued universally preferable behavior in the past. That's not begging the question.
Yes, it is begging the question. Sure, it's saying
That in order to make an argument, you have to have pursued universally preferable behavior in the past.
but a begging the question fallacy occurs when the conclusion of the argument is included within one or more of its premises, and it doesn't matter whether or not those premises are correct or incorrect. Which is to say, implicit in the premise, in order to make an argument you have to have pursued universally preferable behaviour in the past, is the conclusion that no argument against the existence of universally preferable behaviour can be valid. That, sir, is begging the question, and you can't just hand wave it away. Unless, of course, you have a preference for falsehood over truth. What's more, this also applies to your fifth proof.
Premise 1 is again begging the question. In fact, it's almost identical to the second proof's first premise, that all organisms require universally preferred behaviour to live, and it carries all of the same problems.
You can't just hand wave this away, Stefan. As someone who proudly boasts that they have the largest philosophy show in the world, for you to so easily discard such a valid criticism is embarrassing. Anyhow, back to Stefan's second proof, and here's that equivocation fallacy that I promised. If Stefan is using exclusively his first definition of UPB,
What is objectively required.
then while this argument is sound, all he's proven is that arguing against objective requirements requires practice of objective requirements. But here's the thing, he doesn't use exclusively this definition. In premise 4, he smuggles in his second definition.
What people should prefer.
In essence, he's asserting that therefore, any argument against
What is objectively required.
requires an acceptance of
What people should prefer.
but it doesn't. Sure, we must acquire calories to live, but that doesn't mean that we should or ought to acquire calories. That, right there, is a bait and switch. It's an equivocation fallacy, and it's a violation of Hume's law. Again, Stefan is either doing this, or all he has achieved is the theft of Kant's work. Now, there's quite a few more comments that I can respond to, such as Stefan insisting that humans are the most successful species.
Human beings can write the most astonishing poetry, haiku, sonnets, you name it. But the sonnets of dung beetles, I mean, they're good-ish. They're just not as good.
That he's never heard of libertarian free will, despite the fact that he's argued for it profusely.
What is libertarian free will? What? I don't know what libertarian free will... I've never heard that phrase before. Free will is an argument in philosophy going back to the pre-Socratics. I don't know what libertarian free will is.
And his relentless condescension and poisoning of the well.
Can you read your young eyes?
But I'll address these comments and arguments in the future if you, the viewer, have the preference for me to do so. So, if you want me to make another video, you ought to leave a comment saying so. But with this said, there is one more thing I feel inclined to respond to. While addressing Stefan's first proof, to give an example of people valuing different things, I said the following.
If there was a scenario in which I had to choose between knowing the truth but permanently diminishing the well-being of organisms, or not knowing the truth but permanently improving the well-being of organisms, I would choose the latter every time.
Now, this is a statement that I really should have caveated, as all I was attempting to convey is that I consider the well-being of sentient entities to be more important than I do the truth. But what I failed to make clear is that in reality, in practice, the way to ascertain and maintain well-being is via truth. And so this statement is purely a philosophically hypothetical one. It doesn't map onto reality. And so what I'm saying is that outside of philosophy, the example that I gave is contradictory. And so in hindsight, I should have used a better example. And so this is on me. It's my bad, my mistake, my blunder. However, Stefan jumped on this single sentence and from it fabricated an entire moral philosophy and somehow even a political agenda.
Oh, yeah, okay, so he's a lefty, so all right.
And then spent a significant amount of time burning this straw man to the ground, after ironically accusing me of strawmanning him.
And this guy says that he would prefer to sacrifice the truth in order to enhance the well-being of organisms. Are you beginning to see the problem here? The sophistry, the lies, the falsehood, the lack of commitment to even his own ethical standard. Horrible, wretched, ridiculous, wrong.
Now the final embers of this straw man, and indeed his final words, were the awkwardly intense.
This is a scenario, my friend. This is a scenario right here. You did it 2 years ago. It's a scenario right here, right now. You have the chance to reject the truth. UPB is wrong, and it will permanently enhance the well-being of people. But you didn't take that, did you? So even by your own argument, you're not only wrong, you're immoral.
And in reply, I want to say the following. This is a scenario, my friend. This is a scenario right here, right now. You did it 11 years ago. It's a scenario right here, right now. You have the chance to act according to what you insist is universally preferable. Don't initiate force. Don't steal. And yet you've stolen Kant's hypothetical imperative. You thief. And so by even your own argument, you're not only wrong, you're immoral. How long do I need to stare at it? How long did he stare at it? Crikey, Stefan. So intense. Anyhow, thank you kindly for the view, and please be sure to check out the Debunked Kickstarter. And as always, an extra special thank you to my wonderful patrons and those of you who have supported the channel via merchandise and PayPal.